On my birthday, my father handed me an envelope and said, "Consider this your gift." Inside was a contract where he had already signed my apartment over to my sister. I looked up at him and said calmly, "Interesting, because I never signed my part." The smirk on his face vanished as everyone realized what that meant. I, 32M, never expected my 32nd birthday to be the day everything came crashing down. But looking back now, maybe I should have seen it coming. The signs were always there, scattered like breadcrumbs through my childhood and adult life, but I'd been too busy trying to earn scraps of approval to notice the pattern. The apartment in question wasn't just any property. It was a two-bedroom unit in a rapidly developing neighborhood that I'd purchased 5 years ago with my own money. Every cent earned through 16-hour days at the consulting firm where I'd clawed my way up from junior analyst to senior partner. My father had never contributed a single dollar toward it, never even offered advice on the purchase. But somehow, in his mind, everything I owned was fair game for redistribution to my younger sister. She'd always been the golden child. While I was expected to maintain perfect grades, work part-time through college, and pay my own way, she glided through life on a cushion of parental funding and zero expectations. Failed a class? No problem. They'd hire a tutor and blame the professor. Lost another job because she couldn't be bothered to show up on time? Just a temporary setback for their precious angel who needed time to find her true calling. The birthday dinner was held at my parents' house, the same sterile suburban home where I'd spent 18 years learning that love was conditional and affection was currency. My mother had outdone herself with the decorating, or rather, she'd paid someone to do it. Balloons clustered in corners, a banner stretched across the dining room, and an expensive catered spread covered the table. It all felt hollow, performative, like every other family gathering we'd had. My sister arrived late, as usual, breezing in with her photographer boyfriend and barely acknowledging anyone. She had that look on her face, the one she always wore when she knew something I didn't. My father kept checking his watch and exchanging glances with my mother, and the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. We ate dinner, making small talk that felt scripted. My mother asked about work, not because she cared but because it was what mothers were supposed to ask. My father dominated the conversation with stories about his golf game and the new luxury car he'd bought my sister last month after she'd totaled her previous one. The third accident in 2 years, but who was counting? Then came the moment. My father stood up, cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a sermon, and produced an envelope from his jacket pocket. He slid it across the table toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He told me to consider it my birthday gift, that it was time I learned what family really meant. I opened it, confused, while everyone watched. Inside was a property transfer contract for my apartment. My father had already signed his name on the line marked for the current owner. The recipient listed was my sister. I read it twice, 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something fundamental about what I was seeing. He explained, casual as discussing the weather, that my sister needed a place to live. Her boyfriend wanted to move in together, and they needed something nicer than her current rental. The apartment I'd bought was perfect for them. Since he was my father, he figured he had the right to make executive decisions about family assets. I'd done well for myself, he said. I could afford to help out my sister who was struggling. Struggling. The word burned in my throat. She'd never struggled a day in her life. She'd never had to choose between eating and paying rent, never worked through the night to meet a deadline, never sacrificed anything for anyone. But I stayed calm. Years of conditioning had taught me how to swallow rage and present a neutral face. I looked at the contract again, then up at my father. I told him it was interesting, very interesting indeed. Because while he'd forged my signature on the owner line, he'd apparently forgotten one crucial detail. I never actually signed my part. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's smirk dissolved like sugar in water. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My sister leaned forward, her face transitioning from smug anticipation to dawning horror as she realized what I meant. I explained, slowly and clearly, that forging someone's signature on a legal document was fraud. That attempting to transfer property without the actual owner's consent was illegal. That I had the original deeds safely stored with my lawyer, along with my will that specifically excluded both my parents and sister from any inheritance. Every word I spoke was measured, precise, delivered without emotion. My father tried to bluster his way through. He insisted I was overreacting, that it was just paperwork. That family didn't need formal permissions for these things. He actually had the audacity to tell me I was being selfish and ungrateful after everything they'd done for me. Everything they'd done for me. I almost laughed. I asked him to enumerate exactly what that was. The childhood where my accomplishments were met with indifference while my sister's mediocrity was celebrated? The college years where they paid her tuition in full while I graduated with debt? The countless times they'd borrowed money from me to fund her lifestyle and never paid me back? My mother tried the guilt approach next. She mentioned how disappointed they were in me, how they'd raised me better than this, how blood was supposed to be thicker than water. She actually cried, though I suspected the tears were more for the loss of control than any genuine emotion. I stood up, collected the fraudulent contract, and told them I'd be leaving. My sister started screaming then, calling me every name she could think of, accusing me of ruining her life and being a vindictive bastard. Her boyfriend sat there looking uncomfortable, probably realizing for the first time exactly what kind of family he was trying to marry into. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Update 1. The next morning, I called my lawyer. We'd worked together on several deals over the years, and he was familiar with my family situation. I'd confided in him months ago about concerns that my parents might try something like this, so he wasn't surprised when I walked into his office with the forged contract. He examined it carefully, confirmed what I already knew, and suggested we had multiple options for proceeding. We could report it to the police as fraud and forgery. We could file a civil suit for attempted theft, or we could use it as leverage. I chose the third option because revenge is a dish best served with legal documentation. I drafted a formal letter, reviewed by my lawyer, outlining the attempted fraud and my response. I wasn't going to press criminal charges, but I was implementing immediate consequences. First, the $50,000 my parents had borrowed from me over the years, always promising to pay back, was now due immediately with interest. I had every text message, every bank transfer, every promise documented. Second, I was formally disinheriting them and my sister from any future claims to my estate. Third, I was ceasing all financial support effective immediately. That last part was significant. I'd been paying for my mother's medication, covering my father's country club dues when he overspent, and regularly bailing my sister out of various financial disasters. Thousands of dollars every month, flowing from my accounts to theirs, taken for granted as just what I owed them for the privilege of being born. I had the letter delivered by courier to ensure signature confirmation. Then I waited. The phone started ringing within an hour. First my mother, hysterical and incoherent. Then my father, trying to sound authoritative but with a thread of panic running through his voice. Then my sister, alternating between rage and manipulation. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sent a single text to the family group chat. I told them all communication would now go through my lawyer, and any attempt to contact me directly would result in a restraining order. My sister posted about it on social media, naturally. A long, rambling rant about ungrateful siblings and family betrayal, carefully edited to make herself the victim. She claimed I'd always been jealous of her, that I was punishing them for loving her more, that I was cruel and heartless for abandoning my family over a simple misunderstanding. The post got traction. Extended family members started reaching out, some supporting her, others asking my side of the story. I didn't engage publicly, but I did send private messages to a few cousins and aunts I'd always been close with. I attached scanned copies of the forged contract, the loan documentation, and bank statements showing the monthly transfers. I laid out the facts without embellishment and let them draw their own conclusions. The response was eye-opening. Several relatives confessed they'd witnessed the favoritism for years, but hadn't felt it was their place to intervene. Others shared their own stories of being manipulated or used by my parents. One aunt told me my father had tried to borrow money from her using my name as collateral, claiming I'd agreed to guarantee the loan. I'd known nothing about it. The extended family network that had once seemed united began to fracture along fault lines I'd never noticed. People were reassessing their relationships, questioning narratives they'd accepted for decades. My sister's social media post got deleted after several relatives commented with pointed questions she couldn't answer. Meanwhile, my parents hired a lawyer of their own. They sent a response claiming the contract had been a joke, a misguided attempt at teaching me a lesson about family loyalty. They insisted they'd never actually planned to file it, that I'd overreacted and humiliated them over a prank. They demanded I retract my statements and restore the financial arrangements. My lawyer's response was brief and devastating. We pointed out that jokes typically don't involve forged legal documents, that their explanation made no logical sense, and that their immediate consultation with an attorney suggested they knew exactly how serious the situation was. We also noted that their continued harassment, despite my request for no contact, was becoming a legal issue in itself. Update 2. 3 weeks after my birthday, things escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. My sister's boyfriend broke up with her. According to mutual friends, he'd been uncomfortable with the family dynamics for a while, and the birthday incident was the final straw. He apparently told her that if she couldn't see how messed up the whole situation was, he couldn't be with someone who lacked that basic self-awareness. She spiraled, lost her job because she was too depressed to show up, got evicted from her apartment because my parents could no longer cover her rent without my monthly contributions. She moved back in with them, and the house that had once been a shrine to her perfection became a pressure cooker of resentment and blame. My father's business started suffering too. He owned a small real estate agency that had been coasting on reputation for years, but word spreads in professional circles. People who'd heard about the forged contract situation, even in whispered fragments, began questioning his ethics. He lost several major clients, and his partners started distancing themselves from him. I felt nothing. No guilt. No satisfaction, just a cold emptiness where family obligations used to live. People asked if I planned to reconcile, to be the bigger person and forgive. I told them forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and my parents were still claiming victimhood. But then something unexpected happened. My grandmother, my father's mother, reached out. She was 91 years old and had always been the quiet backbone of the family. She asked to meet me for lunch, and despite my reservations, I agreed. She told me she knew everything. She'd known for decades how my father treated me versus my sister, how my mother enabled it, how I'd been systematically taught that my worth was measured in what I could provide. She apologized for not intervening sooner, for thinking that family business should stay private, for prioritizing peace over justice. Then she told me something that changed everything. My father had been the youngest son in his family, spoiled and indulged by his parents while his older siblings were held to impossible standards. He'd spent his entire adult life recreating that dynamic with his own children, unconsciously playing out the patterns that had shaped him. It didn't excuse his behavior, she said, but it explained it. She'd rewritten her own will. She informed me, leaving everything to me. My father would get nothing, and my sister would get nothing. It wasn't a fortune, but it was substantial. A lakeside cabin that had been in the family for 3 generations, several investment accounts, and enough cash to make a difference. She wanted me to have it because I'd earned it through character rather than manipulation. I tried to refuse. I told her I didn't want to cause more family drama, that I'd made peace with being the outsider. She laughed, a dry crackling sound, and said drama happened whether I participated or not. The only choice I had was whether to let it define me. Update 3. 2 months after my birthday, my father showed up at my office. Security called to ask if I wanted him removed, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to a 10-minute meeting in a conference room with my assistant present as a witness. He looked terrible. Weight loss, dark circles under his eyes, the kind of worn-down appearance that comes from sustained stress. He told me he wanted to apologize, that he'd been wrong, that he'd let favoritism poison our relationship. He admitted the contract had been real, not a joke, that he genuinely believed he had the right to redistribute my assets to my sister because that's what family did. I asked him what had changed. Why now, after months of lawyers and accusations, was he suddenly seeing clearly? He said his business was failing, that my mother was threatening divorce, that my sister had become unbearable to live with now that reality had caught up with her entitlement. He'd lost the respect of his colleagues, the comfort of his lifestyle, and the illusion that he was a good father. He wanted to know what it would take to fix things. I told him nothing. There was nothing he could offer that would undo 32 years of conditional love and calculated neglect. I didn't hate him, I explained, but I didn't love him either. He was simply a man I used to know, someone who'd held power over me through biology and social convention, someone who no longer mattered. He cried. Actual tears, running down his face while he begged me to reconsider, to give him a chance to prove he'd changed. He offered to transfer property to me, to pay back every cent with interest, to publicly apologize and make things right. But I'd learned something over the past 2 months. Some relationships are too damaged to repair, too toxic to rehabilitate. The effort required to fix what was broken would consume more energy than it was worth, and I'd spent enough of my life pouring myself into a family that saw me as a resource rather than a person. I told him I accepted his apology, but that acceptance didn't mean reconciliation. He could live with his choices, and I would live with mine. Then I stood up, wished him well with complete sincerity, and walked out of that conference room knowing I'd never see him again. My grandmother passed away 4 weeks later, peacefully, in her sleep, exactly the way she'd wanted to go. The will reading was predictably explosive. My father contested it immediately, claiming undue influence and mental incapacity. It went nowhere. My grandmother had been sharp until the end, and she'd worked with her own lawyer to ensure the will was ironclad. The cabin is where I'm writing this from now. It's autumn, and the lake reflects the orange and gold leaves like a mirror. I've taken a leave of absence from work to figure out what I actually want from life now that I'm not performing for an audience that never appreciated the show. My sister sent one final message through a mutual friend. She wanted me to know she'd realized how messed up everything was, that she was getting therapy and trying to understand how she'd been shaped by the same toxic dynamics that had damaged me. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, just wanted me to know she was working on herself. I appreciated the message but didn't respond. Maybe someday we'd have a conversation, but that day wasn't today. For now, I was focused on building a life that belonged entirely to me, one where worth wasn't measured in sacrifice and love wasn't contingent on utility. The apartment is still mine. I've rented it out to a young couple who remind me of myself at their age, working hard and trying to build something stable. The rent is below market value, and I've told them if they ever want to buy, I'll give them first option at a fair price. People ask if I regret how things turned out, if I wish I'd handled it differently. The truth is, I regret nothing. That birthday was the best gift I ever received, even if it wasn't the one my father intended. It gave me permission to stop trying, to walk away from people who saw me as a means to an end, to finally prioritize my own peace over their comfort. I'm 32 years old, sitting in a cabin by a lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of fire. I have enough money, enough success, and finally enough distance to see that family isn't about biology. It's about respect, reciprocity, and genuine care. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and build your own version of family from scratch.